So it's been a couple days since that absolute whirlwind of an opening World Cup qualifying window, and it's time to kind of take stock and reflect on what it is that we just witnessed. And in order to do so, I've brought on a woman who has a perspective a lot different than mine because she actually watched the games, all three games in the stadium. I'm bringing on Meg Swanick, who is a reporter for Last Word on Sports. Meg, thank you so much for joining the show. And I think the first question that I want to ask you is, we've heard so much about away qualifiers and CONCACAF and how crazy the atmospheres and the stadiums and just everything is. Did you get a sense of that whenever you first set foot in El Salvador?
Yeah, definitely. The atmosphere of a World Cup qualification happening hit me as soon as I hit the airport in San Salvador. In El Salvador, the immigration officer, as soon as he saw my passport, asked me if that's why I was there. And he wanted to know, who's your favorite player? And is this why you're in the country? And he wanted to tell me about his favorite player, who was Christian Pulisic, it turns out. So the minute you hit the country, people are excited that you're there for the game. Going to the game and being in the stadium in San Salvador, it is unlike anything I've experienced in life. And that's something that I shared with my social media networks, and a lot of people were like, well, this is what football is like, or this is what World Cups are like. But I've actually been fortunate to travel a lot in life, and I've been to a lot of not World Cup qualification in CONCACAF, but I've been to several World Cups. I've been to several games around the world, and the energy in the Cuscatlan in San Salvador was completely unmatched in my experience.
Now, I've heard that the players' experience is a little bit different than the press because, the players are the opposition force coming in to essentially extinguish the dream of a World Cup from this country. And the players say that basically everyone that they meet, from whatever, like you said, the immigration officer all the way on down to by the time they leave, is aware that that's what they're in the country to do, is to take away this dream of the World Cup from their country, and they're treated as such. But I've heard that the press doesn't necessarily get that treatment, that they're a lot more welcomed in the country. Did you get that? And in the stadium as well?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't experience any antagonism at all, to be honest with you. And if anything, it was people who were very excited that we were there, and they wanted to know what we thought of their country. They wanted to know, had we had the local cuisine. They wanted to know if we made it anywhere outside of the stadium. When we were coming in on the media bus and into the stadium in San Salvador, we got there 5 hours early because of traffic, and that was what was recommended. And there were thousands of people already in the stadium at 3 p.m. for an 8 p.m. kickoff. And people were like leaning over the section we were walking in, being like, hello, welcome, we love USA, kind of thing. So like extremely, extremely welcoming. So, I think I'm not a player. I can't speak to the player experience. I can say coming in with the media, I think people thought our media bus was more important than it was. So there was lots of people taking pictures of us coming in, but all friendly. And then coming into the stadium, people went out of their way to welcome us. And that's something that in speaking to the American Outlaws and the US fans who were there, was reflected in their experience as well. I don't think that the fans who were there experienced too much antagonism, although I did hear that there was some.
Well, let's talk about the actual game because, coming into this World Cup qualifying window, it's been, ever since Cuba, we've been hearing about this young group of players that are going to get tested in World Cup qualifiers away. We've got 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds, very young players. And Gregg ended up starting a bunch of them in this first World Cup qualifier away. A lot has been made of like Gio Reyna jumping at the fireworks during the anthem and that. What was the sense whenever you were looking at the faces of the players as they were entering the stadium during warm-up? Did you sense that tenseness in the air? Did you sense like that there was a lot of anxiety, or did you feel like it was kind of like just another game for a lot of these players?
It's a mix. I would say it varies by player. I think it's, as much as arriving to a stadium 5 hours early and just sitting there, it should be said, I love the Cuscatlan Stadium. There's not a press box. We were just in the stadium kind of thing. So we were just like there 5 hours early, observing everything as it unfolded, watching every player as they emerged and the reaction from the crowd. And similar in Honduras. And I think it's really interesting to be able to observe like who was the first player out on the field and how are they walking around. You know, in Honduras, it was Christian Pulisic who was first out on the field. And like the way that he walked out on the field and was looking around, I could just like feel the gravitas of that moment that he was feeling all the way from where I was in the press box. Similarly, in El Salvador, I think it was Tyler Adams and Serginho Dest who were the first out, and they were getting applause, and people wanted autographs, and Weston McKennie wasn't far behind them. So it's interesting to see that, like, see them come out, see them look around, and from all the way up, wherever you are in the stadium, you can definitely feel the gravitas of that moment that I think they're feeling as they're doing their 360 circle around, looking at all the fans who are already there 5 hours out, kind of like sinking in. This is everything everybody said that it is, I think. In terms of nerves, you know, it's hard to tell who's nervous and who's not. And I think when you bring up Gio Reyna, and I think generally, like something I was wondering, it's not my first World Cup, it's not my first football or soccer match, but it was my first CONCACAF World Cup away qualifier in El Salvador. And something I wonder about is whether or not we've made a cliche of the conditions and the fans in the stadium and how hostile it is. And I think to a certain extent, it can be like a self-perpetuating prophecy and something that psychologically gets to you. And when I saw Gio Reyna jump at the firework, it wasn't just funny. It was also, I think, I mean, he was psychologically like ready for it to be a hostile atmosphere. And when the firework went off, he was a little bit freaked out, wasn't he? And I think that speaks to a little bit of the nerves that he clearly had, and that I imagine a lot of them have.
Now, I'm curious about your thoughts in the stadium. Watching the game on TV, the U.S. came out and dominated that game in the first 8 minutes or so, culminating with that Miles Robinson chance on that header. And then it seems like a switch just flipped where the American players just turned off. And then for the rest of the half, El Salvador was really bringing it to us. Was there anything in the stadium or anything like that that you noticed where the U.S. just had a ton of momentum and then all of a sudden it went away and we were kind of holding on from dear life for that point on?
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think there was a definite momentum shift from those first 10, 15 minutes to the rest of the match. And I'd been wondering if we'd made a cliche of the CONCACAF away match and if it had become something that we, you know, overdid a little bit and made into a cliche. And I think that, you know, we have incredible talent on our team who are not inexperienced in contentious matches and tough opponents. And I think that they came in really wanting to deliver. And in those 10, 15 minutes, that's what they were doing. They were ready to deliver. They all wanted to be the guy. They were all trying to take that first step. In those 10, 15 minutes, though, and starting with the national anthem, which the impact of that I don't think can be discounted, and then the 10 minutes of fireworks going off as the game was starting, I was thinking, sitting in that stadium, you know, it's one thing watching it on TV, but being in the middle of that stadium, which was absolutely packed, the energy was unreal. And again, I've been to 3 different World Cups. I've never, like, the noise level, the energy was unlike anything I've experienced before. I was thinking, you know, playing beneath this has to be tough. It actually does have to get to you. And I was never more convinced that the crowd is going to impact you and scare you than in that 15, 20 minute, 25 minute into the first half than I was in El Salvador. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was in part due to the crowd. I think it was also just due to, you know, a lot of crossed wires, a lot of nervous energy, a lot of youth, a lot of people who it's their first World Cup qualifier. And when it wasn't delivering at first, I think that psychologically they were getting really beat back by that.
Were there any moments watching the game live that we might have missed on TV that kind of stuck with you throughout that game?
So I'm not sure. I taped the game and I haven't watched the tape yet. So I'm not sure what exactly you might have missed on TV. I think that something is missed when you're not in the stadium yourself. And I think that that's an interesting and bigger picture question about not just being a fan, but being part of the media. You know, like, what do you need to be in a stadium to experience or report on? What is just the same when you're watching from home, or what difference might it be if you're in the stadium? And I think it is all fan energy, and just, having been in a lot of stadiums across the US or across Central America for league play, I think that the consistent and loud and exuberant and unmatched energy is something that you feel when you're in the stadium. And I would have a hard time believing that the players on the US team didn't feel that, and that it didn't impact the intimidation factor of how they were playing.
What was that song that the El Salvadorian crowd was singing? I mean, it was incredible listening to on TV.
Was it Arriba con Selección?
I don't know. They were singing one a few times, especially in that second half, and it just sounded fantastic. I don't know what it was.
I think that could have been it, but I'm not sure.
So let's move on. I mean, it ended up being a tie, a really disappointing tie for the U.S. In that game, a game where the U.S. did have some chances but weren't able to capitalize, and we were kind of unsure of like what that would mean later on in qualifying at that point. Post-match press conference, like what was the tone? What was the feeling like after the match, after that disappointing tie? Let me interrupt this video to thank today's sponsor, and that is OneFootball. OneFootball, of course, is the perfect companion app for any soccer fan. It'll give you up-to-the-date stats about your favorite players, teams, leagues, anything you're interested in as a soccer fan. It's a fantastic tool if you're following along with World Cup qualifiers, because the U.S. is playing a lot of squads that, you might not know all the players' names. You can check out the OneFootball app. You can see the formations. You can see the players, where they play, their home clubs, all that good stuff, as well as get that vital information like what time the game kicks off, where this game's going to be played, if you want to know the name of the stadium, if you're into that kind of thing. It'll let you know all that stuff in the app. For a free download of the OneFootball app, you can click the link in the description. You will not only be getting the latest news and information about your favorite clubs, players, teams right to your phone, but you will also be supporting the Yank Report directly and supporting a company that supports content creators for U.S. soccer like me. So thank you to OneFootball, and let's get back to the video.
So after the game was over, it's funny. So like the press box was kind of non-existent. Like there wasn't an actual press box. We were just kind of in the stadium surrounded by El Salvador fans. And then when the game ended, it was like kind of every man for himself, make your way to the media bus kind of thing, which was fun. So we all kind of just made our way out to the media bus. It was really hectic, overcrowded. And then when we got to the media bus, it was a long time getting out of the stadium. The fans were everywhere. They were playing music. They were still celebrating, which I think...
Yeah, I saw the team bus was like stranded for a while, that the crowd just wasn't letting the bus leave.
Yeah, it took a really long time for the team bus, because we were behind the team bus and we followed the team bus. So the media stayed...
When you say a really long time, do you mean like 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, 2 hours?
20 minutes.
20 minutes?
Yeah. So it could have been worse. But 20 minutes, and, everyone's outside the team bus and the media bus taking pictures and like trying to get your attention and knocking on the bus kind of thing. So we followed them out of there. And then we got to the team hotel, who are separate from the media hotel. And the media hotel is interesting because it's not just the media who are staying there. It's, all the U.S. soccer people. It's all the fans as well. So American Outlaws are there. So it feels like the U.S. soccer hotel. And it's interesting the conversations you have with all those people who are there. But so we got to the team hotel, and Tim Ream was actually the first player that they brought in to talk to us. And he sounded pretty even, and actually he had a really good game. People had a lot of criticism for Tim Ream being in the roster, but he did his job. And he had some pretty, even, responsible responses. They brought in Tyler Adams, who I'm consistently impressed by, not just by his style of play, but by the leadership he shows on and off the field. Listening to him even in the press conferences, you can feel the confidence and calm that he brings to any question, to any situation. And then they brought in Gregg, who is always interesting to hear from. I think that he was disappointed in the result, as were the other players, but I think that from the fan base and from the media and from the team, it was like a cautious disappointment after the El Salvador match. I think that's a game we should have won, but we were chalking it up to being a CONCACAF away kind of match, and the conditions and the fans and whatever
Yeah.
else. But realistically, it's a match that we should have won. So I think there was cautious disappointment, even though it was the first match, and that's something that Gregg really spoke to. I think that as time went on, he became more nervous in the press conferences, but in that first one, I think he sounded a little bit more confident.
Yeah, I think you're alluding to the fact that that El Salvador game was pretty much the appetizer, and things really started getting different after
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
let's fast forward. We get back to the United States. We get to Nashville. The team is preparing for the game on Sunday, and then Saturday we notice that Gio Reyna is not in training, and that's the first like alarm bell that sort of goes off for the national team. And then later on, we get news, I believe the next morning, that Weston McKennie's not going to be with the team.
Right.
So tell me about kind of the pre-match energy. I'm not sure. Did you guys have a presser before the game, or like what was happening amongst the press and amongst the fans who were in attendance, knowing that Reyna was not going to be there and that there was something weird going on with McKennie heading into that Canada game?
So we found out pretty much as you did about the McKennie situation, which I think is interesting. It's definitely something that Gregg and the team are keeping close to the chest, which to a certain extent I can understand. I think that there was a lot of perhaps deserved people on Twitter or on social media who were thinking that like the media knew, and they knew before it was announced, and they knew after it was announced what was happening. And I think that that's not the case, actually. I think the media was as unaware of what was happening and trying to dig for the details as anybody else was, to be honest with you. And I think that there were definitely murmurs happening. I heard several rumors in the media bus or in the press conferences, and all of them turned out to be untrue. So I think that the media was as unaware, uninformed, and trying to figure out what happened with Weston McKennie, especially at that point, but even heading into the Honduras match as anybody else. I think that in terms of, the injuries creeping up or Zach Steffen having gotten COVID and things like that, there was still, though, in the camp, in the media, and in the fan base, a lot of positive optimism about how we were going to fare in that game.
Of course, yeah.
In World Cup qualifying, and with the talent that we have, Christian was going to be playing, albeit back from having COVID. He was going to be back in the team. I think that people across the board, media, fans, and U.S. soccer expected a win. I don't think anybody expected the game that we got.
Well, let's talk about the game. Ends up being a 1-1 tie, and I think the bigger picture is this U.S.'s attack inability to break down that low block. The game, of course, was in Nashville, so we did have that home field advantage. I know you just left this El Salvadorian home field advantage that you talked about as being one of the most incredible atmospheres that you've experienced. It's going to be unfair to compare Nashville to El Salvador, but kind of heading into that game, what was your sense of the crowd, of the American Outlaws, of the new energy that we're having with this new crop of players? Was there the confidence abound in that stadium?
It's it's an important question. I want to be careful in answering it, though, because I think, in this window, I think that questions that we have for ourselves as American soccer fans, as a U.S. soccer culture, as a CONCACAF soccer culture, really showed up in this window. And they're questions that aren't new, and they're going to continue showing up throughout the window. And, chief among those questions is, like, as American soccer fans, where are we playing games? What kind of stadium do we want to be in? Where in the country do we need to be to have the right atmosphere? How are we going to be cheering? How are we different from traditional football countries? All those things, I think all those questions show up. I mean, it's almost fair coming from behind. Like in El Salvador and Honduras, people are at the stadium in the thousands 5 hours ahead of the game. And then the noise is consistent from at least 3 hours ahead of the game through the end of the game. Like the atmosphere is unreal. And I think that Nashville, it wasn't my first time in Nashville, so I'll break it into two parts. I'll talk about like the outside of the stadium atmosphere and then the inside of the stadium atmosphere. I think the American Outlaws, and I think that the inside of the stadium atmosphere once the game started was pretty strong, actually. I think that it wasn't a sold out crowd. I think that they did a really good job of getting cohesive chants going, of getting an atmosphere going. I think that after the Brendan Aronson goal, there was an incredible sense of relief. You know,
Hmm.
it's incredible to feel an entire stadium, not a packed stadium, but an entire pretty full stadium feel relieved at the same time, which I think you could feel after that goal. And then feel it lose its breath
Oh yeah.
together all at once. Like it was just, and everyone in the media box too, like everyone stopped typing, everyone stopped doing anything. And then the guy next to me was like, they made that look so easy. Like after like a full minute of doing nothing. And I think that that collective response was powerful as well. And that's part of why I like being in stadiums are those big collective responses that you feel
And this,
together.
how big is the stadium in Nashville? This is a pretty big one, right?
I don't know the capacity actually off the top of my head,
Is it
but
an
it's
NFL
in the
stadium or is
Titans
it a
play. It's a
soccer
football
specific?
stadium. It's
It
not
is, yeah.
soccer specific.
Okay, so it's probably at least 60,000, whereas the one in El Salvador was probably 25,000, something like that.
Yeah, so Nashville SC is getting a soccer specific stadium, but for now they're playing in the Titans stadium, and that's where they had this
Yeah.
game.
Now, no, I want to come back to this at the end of the interview because there's a whole nother discussion to go along with that. But as far as specifically the game, we've been talking about how this team is fairly or unfairly carrying the burden of the previous cycle missing the World Cup, and the
Yeah.
fans are kind of living and dying with every moment with that in the back of the mind. And I think we experienced that. I mean, you saw it in the stadium, but we experienced that throughout, soccer Twitter, and for everybody watching at home. As soon as that goal goes in for Canada, I mean, everyone got that, oh my God, it's happening all over again feeling. And like
Yeah.
you said, the stadium just seemed to just uh, go completely quiet. So what was that
Done.
second half like in that stadium uh, for that game?
I would say, thank God it was a home field advantage actually there, and a lot of credit to the energy that that home field advantage did have, because there was an immediate shock, and it took a minute for everybody to get their feet. You know, you could feel the shock, you could feel the energy coming out of the stadium, and after a minute or two, it came back in full swing and like louder than it was before, I would say. And we didn't score again, and it ended up a draw, but there were other chances, and it could have ended up a loss, which would have been
Yeah.
digging an even deeper hole quite as easily. And I don't know. I don't think that the fans are everything. I don't think the atmosphere is everything, but I do think that it impacts a team, especially a team that I think is psychologically trying to figure out who they are, how they're working together. And I think that especially in that point in time, I think that the team was reflective of how the fan base was feeling and how the media was feeling, where there was this horrific question, are we doing this again?
Yeah.
Kind of thing as soon as that second goal happened. And they feel that pressure, and they feel the catastrophe looming, and you could feel that in the press conference as well. So I would say stadium wise, not that it's all that matters, but I think that it lost its breath, and then it caught momentum even higher than it had been in the first half. I'd like to think that that plays a part in keeping the game how it was, even though it could have gone a different way. And I would say that the lingering feeling that we might be doing this again stayed with the crowd, though, and you could feel that.
Oh yeah, and following that game, I mean, the look on Christian Pulisic's face was just absolutely devastating. Brendan Aronson gave an interview where he like said Canada sat back and didn't want to play, and it was, as a fan, it just wasn't what I wanted to hear from him
Yeah.
at that time. John Brooks looked like he didn't want to be there at all. What did it look like in the press box after that game? Because boy, the bottom absolutely dropped out of the U.S. soccer fan base, and the pitchforks and the fires were out. It was about as low as I've seen it in quite some time. What was that atmosphere like after the game?
So amongst the PR and media staff who work for U.S. Soccer, they're fully aware of the tinderbox that they're sitting upon. And there was a somberness, a concern to all of them. They're very aware at the end of that game. And then in the first half of the Honduras game, even more so, kind of thinking about what are we going to say? What are we going to do with this? So the sense of catastrophe was visible on the U.S. soccer staff after that game in the press conference. In terms of the people that they brought in that we were interviewing, who were giving the press conferences, I mean, I'm sure you've watched it. I'm sure a lot of your listeners have watched those press conferences. But it's like the little things in between them sitting there and answering the question. I posted it on my Twitter, and still to this day, I'm not exaggerating when I say I keep thinking about Christian Pulisic walking into the room, not even just sitting there and how he answered the questions, but the way that he was walking into that room and the way that he walked out of it. It was the ghost of Kuwait. It was he, the heaviness and the disappointment. And I think that that's something that appeals to me about him as a player. This means a lot to him. He doesn't, I think it would be callous to accuse players of not caring, but I don't know that they all care to the same degree. I think Christian Pulisic cares a lot about this. And that was really evident on him walking into the room. I think Tyler Adams, Christian Pulisic, you could feel the devastation and concern. Tyler Adams has this impenetrable confidence, even then, kind of thing. And people were asking him hard questions, and he had that late foul that was questionable and maybe coming out of frustration, but he has this consistent confidence that I find really appealing in a player and good in a captain. And Gregg seemed nervous. I think he is nervous, and I think he was increasingly nervous with every press conference that went on in that window.
Yeah, I mean, throughout his tenure, Gregg has always been even-keeled, and I think that word you used to describe Tyler Adams, impenetrable, I've kind of got that sense from Gregg. But all of a sudden, everybody's aware that if you don't get 3 points in this next game, the hot seat's going to turn into a flaming hot seat. This is not how this is supposed to go. The U.S. getting 2 points out of the first two games. You're not supposed to lose at home, particularly to a team like Canada. That's unacceptable. And like you said, on TV watching it, it looked like the first time really seeing Gregg kind of start to crack. So give me a sense of seeing that live in person. The media does get accused of not asking the tough questions and not being hard enough. Though I did feel like there was some pretty penetrating questions being asked of him, specifically about his tactics and his roster selection. But what was your sense watching him speak following that game?
I think it's a critical balance for media for having the right questions that penetrate, and I won't speculate on how the media ask their questions broadly, but I would say that there are familiar faces in the crowd, and Gregg definitely recognizes certain people, and he definitely walks into the room looking shifty-eyed at certain people maybe that are going to ask him the hard questions, and is on a first name basis or showing his gratitude for the ones who are asking him questions that make him look good. And they're still fair questions, why is it difficult putting together this kind of roster with all these competing seasons, and why is it difficult to do X? How are you navigating such a youthful team? And you can show his gratitude to the questions that make him look good. And there are questions that are fair that make him look good. And it's human to want those questions. I don't know that I would say the media altogether shies away from asking the hard questions. But, I think Gregg walks into the room looking shifty-eyed at the media in general in that scenario, to be honest with you. And I think that the way just his mannerisms, he struck me as nervous, and he struck me as defensive as well. And wanting to point out certain things like CONCACAF is difficult, this team is young, it's hard to put together these rosters, and emphasizing ad nauseum that, we set the bar high and this isn't a catastrophe yet. But he struck me nervous and he struck me defensive, and I think it's human to want questions from people who make you look good.
Fair enough, yeah. So one of the big credits that Gregg has had throughout his tenure is his team building and the idea that this team was like a unit that was built strong together and they're all happy being a part of the group. And after this Canada game, this is the first time we've really seen like a chink in that armor, and we started questioning, are does the team believe in Gregg? Is there a sense that maybe there might be some factions in this group? Is everybody on the same page? Did you have any sense of that with your experiences just listening to the players and kind of seeing the team interact following that game?
I think that there are signs of potential cracks, but I think overall, they're showing a consistent face. I think that what the individual players are reporting to the media isn't always consistent, to be honest with you. I think that Christian Pulisic in general and other media members have said like, oh, he's not the best in interviews, but he does seem to contradict what other players are saying at times, and I think that's worth thinking about, to be honest. And he had that comment, which I wonder if it's overblown. I think it's worth thinking about. It could be overblown, where he said we need new ideas
Yeah.
after the Canada game. That could be directed at his teammates, probably also, if nothing else, directed at Gregg, but there's that comment. And I think that there's things in the mannerism outside of the press conferences, but just in the matches between players and Gregg that make me wonder if there's a rift in the locker room. I think that his decision with Weston was in part trying to take control of the locker room and set a precedent. So, I can't say anything with complete knowledge of what's happening in the locker room. I'm not in the locker room. I think there's signs of some people having lack of faith in Gregg's plan or a lack of a plan. And a few of our key players, to be honest with you. But I wouldn't say that. I think that it can be overemphasized in some of what I'm seeing on social media.
Yeah, it's interesting, and pressure cracks pipes. So that next result was going to be absolutely everything. So heading into the final game against Honduras, I mean, let's see. Serginho Dest ends up being out. Gio Reyna's out. Zach Stuffen is out. Weston McKennie, of course, is out. And let's talk about Weston McKennie for a second, because you mentioned kind of the players speaking about that and their different opinions on that. Was there a sense from you that the players in unison thought that it was the correct move to remove Weston McKennie from the camp, or did you sense any sort of maybe indecision in that?
I don't think every player. So something I would say about the media is that not every player is getting grilled with the same questions, and I think some of the younger players are given easier questions sometimes, to be honest with you. So Brendan Aronson, for example, was one of the first players we talked to after the Weston McKennie announcement, and he pretty much wasn't asked about it, so we didn't have the opportunity, and I could have asked myself, but I didn't, about that. Overall, I would say that the team mantra, probably hand it to them to repeat, is that, they're forgiving, but rules are rules kind of thing. So the only player who kind of erred from that was Christian Pulisic, and he was asked a rambling question, to be fair. And so I was talking to different people about it, and some media members were like, he's not good in interviews or he misspoke, but he was asked a rambling question about whether or not the team had spoken to Weston. And after Matt Turner had just said in the interview before that Weston had spoken to all of them, and they forgave him, Christian was asked, did you speak to Weston McKennie before he left? And he seemed to say no. So I don't know if there's anything to be made of that, and I don't want to blow that up, because I think it is possible that he was asked a rambling question about whether or not they had been a part of the decision, whether or not they'd spoken to him, and what they felt about it, which are kind of three very different questions. And all he said was, we were told by the staff. So you can take that in a number of different ways. But outside of that, I would say the team was overall in cohesion if they were asked, and I would caveat that the younger players weren't asked, that they were in cohesion, that it was the right decision.
That's interesting. I've I've always wondered about Christian Pulisic's star power because at this point we have a ton of players who are fantastic players. I mean, Gio Reyna is. I mean, if he's not as good as Christian Pulisic right now, he's pretty close.
I'm
And
with you.
yet,
Yeah.
U.S. soccer is still just focused on Christian Pulisic, and his every move
Yeah.
is so just dissected. And so much of that, even though he's not good in interviews and he's just does not have like a big personality and stuff, he just seems to give fans a window into his emotions with his expressions, with his answers. Even though he's not the most descriptive or talkative player, he seems to kind of find a way to just give people just wear his emotions on his sleeve and let people know what's going on inside. So it's interesting that like comes across in interviews. Let's
Absolutely.
move on to the final game. And I mean, this was just about as tense of a U.S. soccer game that I can recall heading into that game. It was pretty evident that this game was going to have a pretty big impact on whether or not Gregg Berhalter remained coach of the U.S. men's national team. Although I didn't think that, barring some type of absolute catastrophe or mutiny from the team, that he would be let go between the September and October window. But he was going to be on absolute thin ice heading into October. What would you mentioned heading into that El Salvador game that like Tyler Adams and Serginho Dest were the first ones on the field, and there was this sense of like we're ready to do this. Did you sense a different tone from the players coming onto the field in Honduras versus El Salvador or Canada?
I'll answer that in two parts. So the first part is Christian Pulisic was the first on the field ahead of Honduras, well ahead of anyone else, and I could feel the gravitas of what he was attributed. I think he takes this very seriously. I think that in his play, and he was getting knocked around in that first half.
Yeah.
Um, to the point where you're it's a whole different conversation, but he was really getting knocked around that game. But he takes it, he's very passionate, he took it very seriously. He was first onto the pitch by a mile, and he was just like taking a look around at this very hours out, very passionate, boisterous Honduran crowd. And I could feel in the press box, and maybe I'm just like manifesting that, but I feel like I can feel his resolve, kind of thing. So
Yeah, there was a sense for me that the Honduran crowd, even though it's like a notorious, world famous atmosphere to play in, was not going to be as big an impact in this game, because it was one of those things that was like, what can the Honduran crowd do to us that we haven't already done to ourselves in this window?
yeah, it's fair. I mean, the Honduran crowd, first of all, that stadium, the stadium is alive. I have a lot to say about just like the difference in U.S. stadiums versus Central American stadiums in general, or like the Cuscatlán, like the way that it's built is imposing. That stadium, the Estadio Olímpico Metropolitano, it is alive. It makes as much noise as the crowd does. So, I think that adds to the whole element of watching a game there. Like there was a point when the game first started where ahead of the game in El Salvador, they had planes coming over the stadium, and I thought that was happening again in Honduras, but it wasn't planes. And I was like, is it trains? It was the crowd doing like a stomping wave
Wow.
kind of thing. So it was like the wave, but stomping their feet. And so it was going around the stadium with their feet, and it felt like you could feel the stadium shaking. And just like the intimidation factor of a stadium making that much noise where you feel like a jet is flying over you, but it's just people stomping is immense. So that stadium is a main character in the drama of the match. But in terms of the players, like feeling the gravitas of that moment, what stuck with me was Christian and how early he came on and the way he was looking around at that crowd. And yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot of hostility generally, especially considering the way it's hyped up to be incredibly hostile. There was an article that came out that I chimed in on where it was like, the grass is 6 feet tall and the hotels don't have electricity and people are throwing animal heads. And all of that is kind of an exaggeration. If it ever existed, that wasn't the case anymore. But yeah, Christian came out first and he took a really healthy look around, and that really stuck with me. And the second thing I'll say that stuck with me was halftime. And the halftime of that game against Honduras was everything. It was the difference between we're not qualifying again to the sigh of relief that we were
Well,
looking okay, but still
before we get to
unwanted.
halftime, I want to ask you about that first 45 minutes.
Okay.
Of course, I mean, it was completely disjointed, and the U.S. three-man back line, and it was rough. A lot's been made of sort of the demonstrative way that a lot of the players were talking to Gregg during that first half. Like
Yeah.
Tyler Adams and John Brooks both
Yeah.
had moments where they were seemed to be dismissive of him, and like coming into that game where there was questions about Gregg losing the locker room. What was your sense of seeing that live in the stadium?
I think it shouldn't be discounted. I think that that's definitely a thing that's happening. I think he had a really experimental lineup with strange decision making and where he was putting key players. And I think it was a strange game to experiment with where you were putting people. And I think that, like Tyler Adams moving him out of the middle was just of all games to try that. And in general, and to a certain extent, like you need to rely on depth for that game. It's the third game and a window, and you have a lot of players who are injured or suspended for whatever reason. But it was a risky lineup, and it was a strange formation, and he had people in weird places, and it wasn't working clearly. And I think that there's truth. I don't think we should put it all on Gregg, but I think there's truth to the belief that if a lot, if not all, of your players are underperforming to how you know they're capable of performing, it's probably an issue in the coaching and formation. And I think that that's something that the players really exhibited. They're not going to tell the media that outright, but you just have to catch it in the hints in between,
Hmm.
like the fans do. And I think that's definitely the case. In terms of like, I don't know if you wanted to move on to halftime, but in terms of the halftime, it's like we beat them on a few different, sure, credit to Gregg for the subs that he made, but he had to. So it's like in part the subs, it's in part the formation change. And then it's also the formation change that Honduras made and the fact that they were very tired. So like it was a win on a few different reasons there. But yeah, I think that there's definitely some lack of belief happening generally in the team and in the locker room.
And it sounds like you don't want to say players' names, so I'm not going to force you on that. But would you say that the players who you had maybe some thoughts about that prior to this game were sort of the same players who were maybe being demonstrative in this game?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I
absolutely.
think I know who you're talking about there. So second half, the U.S. comes back and we score that goal that just kind of serves to be a sense of relief for the fan base. The U.S. goes on to score a few more goals, and then we see something that I don't know that I've ever seen in a World Cup qualifier, where the stadium turns on the team. They
Hard.
start they start olaying for the U.S. and
Yeah.
just what? Tell me about the atmosphere whenever that happened.
So a few things. I mean, it's a bit funny. So like one of the women who work for U.S. Soccer, she missed the Anthony Robinson goal, and she thought the equalizer was the Pepe goal because it was just completely silent when the U.S. scored, and so she had completely missed the first goal, which was funny. So like first of all, when the U.S. scored, it's funny to be in a stadium where like you're scoring goals and scoring another goal and scoring another goal, and then it's just completely silent. And if you're not watching, you're not catching it. In terms of the Honduran crowd, anybody who thinks that United States men's national team Twitter gets toxic needs to spend 1 minute in that stadium in Honduras. And I think it's similar across Central America and Mexico, like the pressure and displeasure that they're going to very vocally show you is unlike anything that I think that the United States men's national team fan base exhibits. So I would say like it wasn't scary per se, but they're definitely throwing stuff, and both of the benches were cleared, and they were throwing stuff at their team as well as the U.S. bench, as well as the U.S. fans, as well as each other. There's like stuff getting thrown everywhere. To be honest with you, I don't know if there was a target. I had to like move spots within the press box because stuff was getting thrown into the press box and getting like dripped onto laptops, and so it was a little bit chaotic. But the anger of that crowd once their team went down and down and down was an energy in a negative direction, that was maybe unmatched also in my life. And again, like, not my first time. I've been to 3 World Cups. I've seen a lot of teams lose. I've seen a lot of very passionate fans lose. Argentinians lose to Germany. Like, I've seen a lot of unhappy fans. That was a very unhappy crowd. They were screaming for their coach to get out. They were throwing stuff. But somewhat understandable given the collapse in that second half.
Somewhat understandable.
I don't entirely hold it against them.
Yeah, I was trying to explain kind of what CONCACAF away is for the players on the field, and I don't think it's like, I don't think that there's the players are under real danger outside of maybe getting stuff thrown at them, but I think there's like a sense of interpreted danger, like something might happen that exists. I don't know if you felt any of that while you're there.
I would say that something bad could happen, and
More so than maybe you might experience in like a Nashville or like Austin.
Absolutely. So, okay, from the press level, and this is something I've said to people too, like, I don't believe that either the crowd in El Salvador or the crowd in Honduras would have caused us harm. Like, we were not encased by anything. Like, if something went down and people meant malice toward us, we would be in harm's way, but we weren't, because people didn't mean harm toward us at all. But we were vulnerable to that, if that were the case. And I think that that's similar in terms of the team members. And there's more security between the fans and the team. And like, when people started throwing stuff, people have remarkable like ability to reach the teams, because there is a track.
Yeah.
So they were like, and again, people were saying like, oh, they were like throwing it at the Honduran team. They were throwing it at both teams, and there was a lot of bottles and stuff beneath both benches, and both benches got cleared. And the riot police are there, but like, there's the threat of them getting hit. One thing I will say that was kind of funny, but indicative of security and something potentially going wrong, is after the Honduran match, so all the European-based players were leaving immediately. So there wasn't going to be like a post-match press conference. It was just, we were going to catch them outside of the bus, or we weren't going to be talking to them. So after the game was over, we went immediately down to the bus by the side of the field, and that's where we caught a few of them. Tyler Adams, Anthony Robinson, and Brendan Aronson in particular. And so we're like right by the team locker room, and theoretically there's like security between the team locker room and outside, where people are waiting for the team bus to leave so they can see the US team or what have you. But some guy had snuck in, and he was like wearing a suit. He was a Honduran fan, and he like had put on a suit, and he had a folder full of headshots of all the US players, and he like wanted to get autographs. And some guy who worked for the US media was like, get out of here. And there was like a pretty, I wouldn't call it contentious back and forth, but the guy who worked for US media was like, get out of here. And the Honduran fan who had snuck in was like, I'm a harmless man. He kept saying, I'm a harmless man. And he was there for autographs. And there was a big back and forth of him trying to get him out of here before the US players came out. But it was funny as much as concerning, because if somebody crazy did want to come in, it'd be pretty easy, I think, actually.
Yeah, that's anytime you travel outside the States, particularly in Central America or South America, there is that sense of like the safety measures are not quite the same there as you might be used to. And I think for a lot of these players that play in Europe, like Estadio Bernabéu's, it's not quite as easy to get in to see Cristiano Ronaldo as it might be to do that in Honduras. And there's you get a sense of that. So whenever the crowd does seem to be rioting against their team, there is a little bit of nervousness there. Yeah. So after the game, Gregg, of course, relieved, but there was also that sense of like, You also kind of wasted 45 minutes putting out this lineup that looked completely useless, and he did hear that from the press. Kind of what was his press conference like in that game compared to the Canada game, compared to the El Salvador game?
Well, I think that there was a sense of relief and a sense that he knew and everyone else knew and all the media knew that that was a game of two halves. And at halftime, I don't know that his job would have been gone. The question would have been there if he
Yeah,
had lost the game. I don't think actually that he would be gone before the next window. But the question would definitely be there and higher than it is before
yeah.
the next window.
The search would have started for sure.
Right. And he knows that. And so I think there was a sense of relief. And then I think that there was a sense for him of playing a self-marketing game of, well, I made these changes at halftime and I told them this at halftime. And here's how I responded. And then emphasizing from behind, like US soccer chiming in with stats on this is our third time ever coming from behind in an away qualifier. And we haven't won an away qualifier since 2013 and all these things. So I think US soccer as well as Gregg were playing a perception game of here's why this is a huge victory and here's why you should have faith in me. And some of that is valid, and some of it is just how you play the game and trying to win the media and the fans back over.
So, I mean, looking at the fan base, I would say the fan base's opinion on Greg Berhalter is somewhere between neutral and definitely thinks he should go. I don't know that I come across a lot of like super positive, Greg's got it all under control fans out there. Would you say that sense is felt within the squad, or specifically with Greg himself?
I think Gregg is out of his depth. It's hard to I've never had a one-on-one interview with him, so it's hard to say, and not knowing him personally how he actually feels. Who knows how people actually perceive themselves and their ability? I think that he feels defensive, and I definitely think that he feels that the criticisms and the expectations are higher than they should be, and that people need to be more understanding of how hard CONCACAF is, which I think is true and not true at the same time, and how young this team is, which is fair and not fair at the same time.
That defensiveness, is that new, or is that something that he's exuded throughout his tenure?
I think it's new and
Yeah.
exaggerated.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So we touched on a few things that I kind of want to get back to throughout this. Specifically, Christian Pulisic. The team won that game against Honduras, but Pulisic once again had one of these games where it looked like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. Comes out late in that game with an injury and just hasn't had that impact that we saw from him last cycle, where he just had a goal or an assist every single game. And it still seems like he's trying to just do so much, and it's not working for him. What was your sense of Pulisic after that game?
So I think that he is someone who hasn't been performing to the best of his ability for the national team, compounded though by the fact that the parts around him aren't either. And it's hard for him to excel in the way that he tends to excel when an offense isn't building around him, kind of thing. And I think that's part of where we get the we need new ideas feedback, is that he can finish on an offense that's delivering, on a team that's delivering, but there's only so much he can do when those other parts aren't coming together.
And
I
that
think
sounds like a criticism of Greg right there.
yeah.
So heading into this next window in October, I've been kind of going back and forth on this, so I kind of want your thoughts. Like, there is a world where the U.S. can qualify for this World Cup by the skin of their teeth, but still, Greg can lose the locker room. Like, the players might start showing more and more that they don't believe in this guy. Is that do you think that there's any world where the U.S. can qualify for this World Cup and Greg is still on the hot seat?
Absolutely. Even likely, actually. And I don't want to I don't think he's the worst coach in the world. You know, he definitely has qualities, and I definitely think that he can turn it around. But I think it is not just possible, but perhaps even likely that we stay on with Gregg and that we go with Gregg to the World Cup with a locker room that's not convinced.
Yeah, it sounds like what I'm hearing from you and kind of what I'm seeing on TV whenever I watch the team is it's kind of teetering right now where there's some emotions that are starting to bubble, and
Yeah.
if this squad doesn't start playing better and looking better, and not just getting by with results, but winning in the way that they have the quality to do so, there's going to be some issues that continue to bubble up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way that teams rally around coaches like John Herdman, honestly, is noticeable, and it's
Hmm.
noticeable how different the U.S. looks around Gregg. And
Hugo Perez was fantastic for El Salvador as well.
yeah, I think that yeah, I wouldn't say that Gregg has completely lost the locker room quite yet, and he does have a successful summer. And some players who probably have some loyalty that they feel toward him from that. But yeah, I think this summer is kind of in question as well because despite those trophies, a lot of the issues that were present in both of those trophy runs are
Yeah.
what is causing us trouble now. And simply because we won the game or won those trophies doesn't mean that there weren't problems and doesn't mean that they're kind of being exacerbated in this more important cycle.
The other big talking point coming out of this was the media and kind of the media's role, not just with the inquisition of Gregg Berhalter, but also about the Weston McKennie story. I have a little experience covering college sports, and I've always felt like the U.S. national team operates more like a college media than like professional sports, because oftentimes college sports are in like small towns with only a couple of publications and TV stations, so a lot of stuff gets covered up and is just never comes out because access is pretty tough to can easily be cut off. What did you, as a member of the media, what do you think is the media's role there? Do you think that they should be asking tougher questions? Do you think that there should be more direct questions, like criticizing Gregg and his decisions about tactics and lineups? Do you think that the media should be running with more whenever it comes to like Weston McKennie and situations like that are happening behind the scenes? What do you think about all the stuff that's kind of come out since this window?
Well, it's a tough question, but a good one. I think generally the evolution of the media is fascinating. And, I think that in this window, there are questions that we have for ourselves as a country, as a confederation, as a region, as people who love soccer or football that showed up in this window that will perpetuate throughout the qualifying window. That includes like fan culture, that includes who we are as a team tactically, that includes the media, and the rapid evolution of the media and what their role is. And something I would say is working with US Soccer has been great, and the other credentialed media that I worked with in this World Cup qualifier cycle were fantastic. But I was surprised by how few there were. I was expecting more people to be there. There were less than 10 in both El Salvador and Honduras, and it was, the big newspapers that you just expect, like New York Times, Sports Illustrated, ESPN kind of thing. And I think they ask good questions, but I do think that they could be driving a little bit harder in a lot of the questions. So I think that the relationship between the media and US soccer is interesting. I think that the relationship between media generally in terms of how we take in the games, how we interpret the games, how we talk about it, like people like who is needed and where are they needed? Do you have to be in the stadium? Do you need a newspaper? Do you need a YouTube channel? Just like the way that we imbibe the games and interpret it, I think is changing rapidly. And I think that's something that the media feels and feels protective of, to be
Hmm.
honest with you. And I think that the insider access is all a part of, like who and where you work and what exactly you're going to be asking. And I'm always an advocate for tougher questions, but to be fair, there is always a balance between access and tough questions. And as a journalist, you do need access. And if you're going to be grilling people, like there was even one journalist, I think he was a Canadian journalist, who asked Tyler Adams some tough questions, and he was getting some icy responses.
Yeah, that's the thing about tough questions is you can ask the tough questions, but they don't necessarily have to answer.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do to force those guys to answer. And then they can not answer your question and turn around and pull your access. And then now what have you got? You know, like you risked it all for nothing.
They definitely remember you, I think. And
yeah,
and
100%.
so it's definitely a game of it to figure out like where exactly is the line between pursuit of full truth and access and getting toward it. I think that's something you wrestle with as a journalist.
Yeah, and you know, so much has been made about the pressure that the fans and the media are putting on the squad, and I mean, if you don't think that there was pressure on Gregg Berhalter, then you didn't watch that Canadian press conference following that game. Yeah. I mean, the guy was visibly different than I've ever seen him before, and he was visibly different on the sideline for that Honduras game. I think that, you know, the sentiment of the fan base is definitely felt, and it's felt not just by Gregg, but it's felt by the staff with U.S. Soccer and by the players on the field as well. I think there was definitely a mirror being held up between the fan base and Gregg.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, I'm rooting for him. I'm rooting for I'm rooting for the federation. I'm rooting for the team. I have my concerns, I think, like the rest of us, and I think that's how we left that Honduras game, was like coming from halftime, the absolute dread of, my God, we're doing this again, to the sigh of relief that we're probably going to qualify, but on what terms, and who will we be, and how will we be? You know, all of the questions I think that plague the culture of soccer in the USA, I think, are with us in that window and will be with us throughout this whole process.
Yeah, and I think that's where we are heading into this next qualifying window, where we're both optimistic and hopeful that things are going to work out, but also aware that there are some cracks forming within the foundation of this team that you can't ignore, and you can't write off, and you can't pretend like they're not there. I mean, we saw them; they're there absolutely, and it's going to be tough moving forward if this squad doesn't start delivering results, specifically in those two home games coming up in World Cup qualifying. Meg, we're about to wrap it up. I'm going to ask you a few rapid-fire end questions. So the first one is, what is your favorite U.S. men's national team kit of all time?
Waldo. Not even close.
Yeah, 100%. That's the one. If you're not covering a game and you're in the stadium and you're watching one on TV, do you have any game day rituals or superstitions or anything like that?
So in my travels and in my life, I'm very focused on like immersing myself in the cultures that I'm with. So if I can, I podcast, book, food. So like learning about the history of that country, not just related to the sport. Book if I have time to read about related to that country.
Wow.
And then food. Yeah. So I try to cover my bases. I go all in. It's not just the team.
I try to eat food from the country as well. It's fun. I like doing that. I like trying to like find out what their national dish is and if it's available, if I can get ingredients and make it, whatever. Meg, thank you so much for coming on. Can you take a minute to tell everybody where they can find your work?
Yeah, so I report on various elements of U.S. soccer culture, including MLS, as well as the U.S. national teams, both men's and women's. And the easiest way to find my work is just following me on Twitter. I'm at Meg_Swanick, SWANICK.
Meg, thank you so much for coming on. This was an awesome conversation. I hope everybody out there enjoyed it. Make sure you like and subscribe and do all that good stuff. On behalf of Meg, my name is Sam, and this is the Yank Report.